How can you focus on your goals when you have no focus to begin with? It's the new year, which means you may be feeling somewhat motivated to make changes to your lifestyle, career, and habits, but the irony is that you have been here before. I say you are somewhat motivated because in the back of your mind, there may be a nagging thought that this could end up like every other new year. No progress, no results, no change. If you are like most people in today's day and age, there is a constant stream of thoughts going through your mind about the things you need to do, routines you want to change, and goals you hope to accomplish. But simply thinking about your problems doesn't seem to be helping. What is missing from the equation are the actions you need to take to get the snowball rolling, but modern life feels so overwhelming that even making the smallest changes to your life can feel impossible. A lot of people turn to self-help books in times of need, especially around the new year, but the most popular one, by far, is James Clear's Atomic Habits. Since it was published in 2018, it's been on the New York Times bestseller list and it has not come down, making it one of the most popular books in modern history. That alone should say something about the current state of our society, right? For a society that feels burned out, the promise Clear offers his readers is what makes the book so attractive. By making tiny changes to your life, changes you can't even see because they are as small as atoms, you too can experience remarkable results. So far, Atomic Habits has sold over 25 million copies, and I imagine those sales are only going to rise since the new year always makes people feel motivated to reach their goals. However, for most people, motivation is a temporary and fleeting emotion. Feeling quote-unquote motivated, a lot of people will buy self-help books but never actually read them. The book may be a bestseller, but the sales will never actually reflect the number of people whose lives have been transformed by the wisdom contained within the text. If I had to guess, that would only represent a very small, atomic percentage of buyers. That is the irony which plagues this book. It seems like a lot of people in our world are at a standstill. We know we need to make changes to our personal lives, but we feel too quote-unquote burned out to even do the smallest things we know will help us in the long run. Why is that? To help you understand the problem with a bit more clarity, today I'll be using the insights from James Clear's own book to explain why so many people feel burned out and incapable of forming good habits in their lives. Then, at the end, I'll highlight the most important concept from the book that helped me make one of the biggest transformations ever in regards to my ability to pay attention, my personal productivity, and my overall happiness. Before I get into the details of the book, I want to tell you a little bit about the struggles that inspired me to share today's message. Within the last year, I went from someone who felt anxious, depressed, and lazy on a daily basis to someone who now feels capable of handling the pace of modern life. To tell you the truth, before getting to this point, I was struggling with all the screens, media, and shallow pleasures that fill today's modern world. I spent countless hours playing video games and watching YouTube videos, which is just normal for a lot of people these days. But those shallow pleasures, sadly, stole precious time, energy, and attention from my life. You can call it a screen addiction, which I know sounds intense, but it is something many people today struggle with. On my journey, I've talked to so many friends about this issue, and I've realized that I am not alone. I've had countless people tell me they feel quote-unquote addicted to their phone, video games, and YouTube, and it's not just the young people either. I have a few friends in their mid-30s who've talked to me about their struggles with screens, and even a lot of my older family members struggle to take their eyes away from Facebook and TikTok. Being 30 and born in 1995, technically I am a millennial, but I share a lot in common with Gen Z, specifically their relationship to technology. Today's world of mobile devices and online pleasures is something I grew up with, and it all felt natural to me, but it came with a huge cost. In 2017, I actually dropped out of college because for the life of me, I could not focus on my schoolwork, and I realized it was because I was spending so much time behind a screen. In the last year, as I went through this journey to build good habits in my life, I actually re-enrolled in university, and I'm super proud to say that I finished my first semester back with straight A's. Surprisingly, I didn't feel any sense of burnout or overwhelm this time around. In reality, my days were chill, well-paced, and manageable. I maintained perfect attendance, I submitted all of my homework assignments on time, and I never worked beyond 6:30 p.m. To get to this point though, I had to make small changes that compounded over time, and I had to stick with those changes even when life felt difficult or boring. It was all worth it though, because these days I rarely feel anxious, depressed, or lazy, and overall I feel happy, inspired, and productive. And now I want to share the wisdom I've cultivated over the past year with you. So if you are desperate to make a similar transformation, my goal is to give you the insight you need to make 2026 the best year of your life, just as 2025 was the best year of mine. Cultivating mindful habits is essential for living a beautiful life. Specifically, I'll focus on reading as an example of a good habit people try, but often fail, to cultivate, especially as we attempt to figure out why the best-selling Atomic Habits is so popular, yet stays unread on a bunch of people's shelves. Even if your goal is not necessarily to become a reader, but to integrate some other habit into your life, the advice that follows will be just as valuable. To start, let's get clear on what James Clear means when he refers to habits. He defines a habit as a routine or behavior that is performed regularly and, in many cases, automatically. Habits can either be good or bad, but where the distinction really matters is in the results they produce in your life. Many people, especially around the new year, wish to cultivate good habits because they want to see a specific result or change in their life. For instance, someone who wants to lose weight may want to start meal prepping so they stop eating so many unhealthy takeout meals, whereas someone who wants to start a YouTube channel, like me, may want to start reading more regularly so they have more things to share with their audience. One of the things Clear finds so powerful about habits, including bad ones, is that they have a compounding effect in one's life, even the tiny and quote-unquote atomic ones. Changes that seem small and unimportant at first will compound into remarkable results if you're willing to stick with them for years. Reading is actually one of the habits he mentions when he explains the compounding nature of our habits. Knowledge compounds, he writes. Learning one new idea won't make you a genius, but a commitment to lifelong learning can be transformative. Over the past 2 years, reading has become a big and enjoyable part of my daily life, and I attribute most of my success as a re-entry student to this daily reading habit. It not only made me feel quote-unquote smarter, but it also made reading assignments feel less daunting, made me more well-spoken, I hope, and gave me interesting things to say in class and even on dates. What started as a tiny atomic habit of reading for a few minutes per day resulted in an extravagant transformation in my personal and professional life. The biggest compounding effect of cultivating this reading habit, however, is that it improved my ability to sit still and focus, not only on reading itself, but also on other slow or boring activities people generally avoid. Reading in this way is a lot like meditation. People know it's good for you, and so they try it for a couple of minutes, only to end up feeling agitated with themselves once they notice their focus waning. When the focus drops, they usually take out their phone and check their notifications, only return to the book and realize that they don't remember anything they just read. Instead of coming back the next day to take another stab at the book, they may feel discouraged from cultivating the reading habit altogether, but that is a trap James Clear wants us to avoid. One of the reasons it is so hard for us to cultivate good habits, he argues, is the sense of discouragement we feel when we start a new habit and quote-unquote fail at it. Even the habits you can't necessarily fail at, like exercise, meditation, journaling, and cooking, are reasonable for a day or two and then become a hassle, he says. Why is this so? For starters, most of the good habits we try to cultivate don't give us immediate rewards or instant gratification, and they often challenge us to put up with uncomfortable feelings and emotions we are not necessarily accustomed to in our day-to-day lives. Even if you actually muster up the courage to try out a new habit for once, like going for a daily walk, it may feel nice for the first couple of days because you are experiencing something new, but the novelty of the routine eventually wears off quickly. Without the novelty, there is no stimulation. With the novelty and resulting stimulation gone from the activity or routine you are trying to cultivate, you are in danger of falling back into your old ways, your bad habits. In fact, the reason why bad habits tend to stick harder than good ones is that very dual sense of novelty and stimulation. Watching TikTok videos, for instance, is the perfect example of an activity that quickly becomes a terrible habit because it continually provides you with a sense of novelty in the form of new content as you swipe through your feed. Most dangerous of all, though, is that the activity requires almost no effort at all. Look at any behavior that fills up much of your life, and you'll see that it can be performed with very low levels of motivation. Habits like scrolling on our phones, checking email, and watching television steal so much of our time because they can be performed almost without effort. The other huge danger I want to point out about these kind of habits, though, like mindlessly checking social media and playing video games, is that they are consumer based habits revolving around products that are designed specifically to addict their users. In the heat of the moment, these products and services may make us feel good, but like all bad habits, they too have a compounding effect, only with much more toxic results than the good ones. Bad habits can give us the instant gratification we love, but it is never true love because such mindless activity ends up creating bigger problems in our lives. Relying on digital technologies for pleasure as opposed to reading a book, for instance, worsens our attention spans, drains our energy, and consumes our free time, largely by keeping us suspended in a constant state of stimulation. When high stimulation pleasures become our norm, it gets increasingly more difficult to form good habits entirely, especially since the good ones are likely to push us out of our comfort zones. Discomfort is painful for the human mind, and as Clear says, we are more likely to avoid an experience when the ending is painful. Habits like reading, especially when you're first getting started, are bound to bring about some sort of pain if you are accustomed to a high stimulation lifestyle. This is why when you actually give it a try, you end up distracting yourself with a bad habit, like checking your phone, because bad habits are likely to become coping mechanisms for stress, anxiety, and any other sort of uncomfortable feeling that may come up. Most insidious of all, though, the bad habits themselves can produce more stress in your life, which may further cement such bad habits. Thus, when it comes to integrating good habits, we also need to think deeply about the bad habits we want to eliminate from our lives. With too many bad habits, there's little space for any good ones. Even though bad habits are pleasurable, they do not contribute to a sense of long-term happiness and satisfaction in life. I, for instance, used to have a life filled with nothing but pleasure and stimulation. Video games, YouTube videos, you name it, and it only culminated into my anxiety, depression, and inability to focus. At that point, I had no good habits to show for my life, though I knew deep down that I desperately wanted to change something. I was tired of doing quote-unquote nothing with my life. So, what did I do? Well, I did what I was already accustomed to. I looked for help in high stimulation environments like YouTube, as opposed to talking to a friend or actually reading a book. I spent hours on end consuming quote-unquote informational self-help and productivity content, but the information was mostly worthless because I failed to do anything with it. In reality, this endless consumption was only making my troubles worse, since it further cemented my lifestyle of stimulation. The irony with a lot of online self-help and productivity content is that the act of consuming it makes us feel as if we are making some sort of progress on our goals. Truthfully, however, a lot of us cultivate habits of consumption because we try to avoid the uncomfortable work that needs to get done for actually achieving our goals. We tell ourselves that watching a video or two is necessary preparation for the work we will eventually do, but here is how Clear puts it. When preparation becomes a form of procrastination, you need to change something. This is one of the reasons why a lot of the self-help and productivity content online can be so insidious. We feel as if we need it to keep us informed, but the content is usually optimized for viewer retention, which only increases the odds that you will consume more of it. All you end up with is stolen time, energy, and attention, the necessary resources for achieving the meaningful goals you have. The other problem with a lot of this content is that social media algorithms praise extreme solutions because such content gets the most engagement and thus produces the most profit for these corporations. I recently saw a video on my Spotify feed titled "How to Fix Your Entire Life in One Day," which totally exemplifies the exaggerated nature of a lot of the self-help content in our current media environment. It's what I call fast productivity. Like fast food, we also want our productivity offerings to be cheap, easy, and fast to consume and apply to our lives. This is why the promise of Clear's book is so captivating. Tiny changes, remarkable results. It may sound too good to be true, but to find out if it is or not, you have to buy the book and ideally actually read it. Whether you end up reading it or not, though, James Clear makes the same amount of money. You may buy Atomic Habits in the heat of consumption, especially because consumption itself is its own form of stimulation. As you're checking out at the register, you fantasize about all the changes you will make, how much better your life will be with the book. The act of consumption is supposedly preparing you to make great changes you've always dreamed about. However, just as when we consume productivity content, we have to remind ourselves to not let preparation become another form of procrastination. In other words, if we want to experience the benefits of Atomic Habits, we have to read the book and apply its wisdom to our lives, but we cannot do such things if we have not cultivated an ability to pay attention to boring, non-stimulating things. My favorite piece of wisdom from the book exists at the end, which is ironic since the majority of people won't actually get that far in the text. Essentially, Clear believes the people who can tolerate boring tasks are the people who will see the most success in cultivating good habits and get the results they've been dreaming of. Really successful people feel the same lack of motivation as everyone else. The difference is that they still find a way to show up despite the feelings of boredom. A lot of people get demotivated from making great changes in their lives once they realize how painful and boring forming a good habit can be. It's weird, because if the change we want to make is truly meaningful to us, why does it have to feel so hard? The only way out, it seems, is to acknowledge the pain. Boredom and other forms of discomfort will always be there as we try to reach our goals, but the more we wish it were gone, the more we will experience such pain. Take it from Clear himself. If you only do the work when it's convenient or exciting, then you'll never be consistent enough to achieve remarkable results. Imagine how many sales the book would have gotten if this were its opener. Overall, I've argued that the self-help and productivity culture that Atomic Habits lives under largely bases itself in stimulating forms of consumption, which is why people will purchase the book but never read it. To read James Clear's book requires you to sit down and engage in a slow, boring activity for once, which often frustrates and discourages people from pushing forward. However, like all habits, good ones compound eventually, but you have to stick with it long enough to see such effects. The best thing you can do right now is start small, extremely and atomically small if you must. People often think it's weird to get hyped about reading one page, he says, but the point is not to do one thing. The point is to master the habit of showing up. This is how I approached my reading habit. I showed up every day to the book, even if I only got around to reading a page or two. Eventually, I found myself comfortable with the pace of the page, and that slow frame of mind ultimately shifted to other aspects of my life. I found myself able to take a walk without headphones, engage deeply in conversation without whipping out my phone, and complete my schoolwork without distractions. For me, it all started with a reading habit, but for you, it could be any kind of slow activity you want to partake in, like painting, cooking, or meditation. At the end of the day, almost all of the meaningful parts of life are going to involve some sort of boredom, pain, and slowness, producing art, building relationships, and creating a life on your own terms. However, you need to start somewhere, and you need to start small and slow, away from the banes of instant gratification and stimulation. If you want to get started with the process and have the best 2026 you can, then I definitely recommend reading Atomic Habits. If not for the information and wisdom itself, do it simply for the joy of reading.